The ship couldn't sink. 25 people still vanished from it. No bodies. No lifeboats. No signs of struggle. Just an empty deck, found 5 weeks later, drifting hundreds of miles off course. In 1955, a merchant ship left Samoa with 25 people aboard. 5 weeks later, she was found near Fiji, still floating, completely empty. She started her life as something else entirely. In 1931, a 69-foot wooden vessel was built in Los Angeles as a luxury yacht for Hollywood director Roland West. He named her Joyita, Little Jewel, in honor of his wife, silent film actress Jewel Carmen. By 1955, decades and several owners later, she was working a much less glamorous route, inter-island trade out of Samoa, hauling cargo and passengers between remote Pacific ports. There was something unusual built into her, though, that would matter enormously later. Her hull was cedar planking, lined with cork in the holds, a combination that made her fundamentally lighter than the water she sailed on. Almost nothing could cause the Joyita to sink. Hold on to that fact. It matters. Her captain was Thomas "Dusty" Miller, an experienced seaman who owned and operated the ship himself, running charter trade, shipping, and fishing work across the islands. On October 3, 1955, the Joyita left Apia, Samoa, carrying 4 tons of cargo, timber, medical supplies, food, and 80 empty oil drums, bound for the Tokelau Islands. It was a short trip, roughly 270 miles, expected to take about 2 days. Aboard were 25 people. Among them, a doctor named Alfred Dennis "Andy" Parsons. A government official. A copra buyer. A couple traveling with their 2 children, ages 11 and 3. Sources differ slightly on the exact split between crew and passengers that day. Some records list 16 crew and 9 passengers, others the reverse. The total of 25 is consistent everywhere. One more detail, easy to miss at the time: the day before departure, the ship's port engine clutch failed. It delayed them by a day. Captain Miller chose to sail anyway, on the one engine that still worked. The ship, by design, could barely sink. The captain knew one of his 2 engines was already broken. He sailed anyway. The event. The Joyita left Apia on schedule. Even running on a single engine, the crossing was considered low risk, the distance was short, the conditions were calm, and the route was one Miller had sailed many times before. She never arrived. When the Joyita failed to reach Tokelau, concern built quickly. This was meant to be a routine, 2-day hop between islands, not open ocean crossing. On October 6, the New Zealand Air Force launched a full search and rescue operation. Planes scoured more than 260,000 square kilometers of Pacific Ocean. Days passed. Then more than a week. Search aircraft and ships combed the waters between Samoa and Tokelau and found absolutely nothing. No wreckage. No debris. No oil slick. Nothing to suggest the Joyita had ever been on that stretch of ocean at all. Eventually, the search was called off. For 5 weeks, the Joyita and everyone aboard her simply ceased to exist, as far as anyone could tell. Then, on November 10, 1955, more than 5 weeks after she vanished, the merchant vessel Tuvalu, under Captain Gerald Douglas, spotted something drifting far off its expected course. For 5 weeks, an entire Air Force search had found nothing. Then a passing cargo ship spotted her by accident, 600 miles from where she was supposed to be. What Captain Douglas's crew found, as they closed in, was strange from every angle. The Joyita was listing heavily to port, tipped at roughly a 45-degree angle, her decks awash, her superstructure badly damaged. And yet, remarkably, she was still afloat, exactly as her cork-lined construction had been built to keep her. She was also completely deserted. No passengers. No crew. No bodies. Not a single trace of where any of the 25 people aboard had gone. What was missing told part of the story. The life rafts and cargo were gone, along with the captain's logbooks, the navigational equipment, and the guns kept aboard. What was left behind told a stranger one: a doctor's medical bag, still holding a few instruments, and a number of blood-stained bandages. The radio deepened the contradiction. It was tuned to the International Distress Channel, suggesting someone had tried to call for help. But faulty wiring had cut its actual range down to about 2 miles. Any distress call sent from that radio would have reached almost no one. And then, a small, eerie detail that stayed with the case for 70 years, the ship's clocks had all stopped at 10:25. Investigators were never able to determine which day. Here's the detail that undercuts the most obvious explanation. Yes, there had been flooding, a burst pipe had let water into the bilge. But the pumps were still functional, and the flooding itself was slow. Experienced sailors aboard would likely have recognized the ship wasn't in any real danger of sinking. Which is the actual center of this mystery, and it deserves to be said plainly rather than dressed up. Investigators were genuinely puzzled as to why the crew hadn't simply stayed aboard and waited for rescue, on a vessel that, by design, was nearly impossible to sink. The ship they abandoned was in better shape than the decision to leave it. 25 people got into life rafts, on a vessel that was never actually going to sink, and none of them were ever seen again. New Zealand's government convened an official inquiry. Despite an extensive investigation, no trace of the crew, the passengers, or the missing life rafts was ever found. The clocks had stopped at 10:25. No one could say what day. Everything else, the logbooks, the lifeboats, the crew, was simply gone. The myth versus the facts. Over the decades, the Joyita earned herself a nickname, the Mary Celeste of the South Pacific. And with that nickname came the usual accumulation of legend, theories involving hidden Japanese wartime holdouts, piracy, sea monsters, mutiny for buried treasure. None of it grounded in anything the official inquiry actually found. Legend, the more sensational versions of this story circulate widely online with no supporting evidence from the 1955 investigation. They make for dramatic headlines. They aren't documented fact. What the record actually supports is theories of a very different character. Piracy, mutiny, equipment failure, or natural disaster have all been proposed by researchers over the years, but no definitive answer has ever emerged. Some retellings mention a crew member with a prior criminal record and a possible motive to disappear. This detail needs direct confirmation against the original 1955 inquiry transcript before it's presented as more than an investigated, ultimately inconclusive lead. The strongest theory the evidence actually supports is quieter and harder to dramatize. Given the slow, manageable flooding, the disabled engine, and the ship's genuinely unsinkable design, the most plausible explanation is human error under panic. In the dark, with one engine gone and water slowly rising in the bilge, Captain Miller may have misjudged the danger and ordered the ship abandoned, possibly using the cargo of empty oil drums as makeshift flotation, before conditions worsened for anyone in the water or in inadequate rafts. This is a theory, clearly labeled as one, not a settled conclusion. There were no pirates. No monster took them. The most likely explanation is also the hardest one to accept. In the dark, on a ship that could not sink, 25 people made a decision to leave it, and the ocean took the story of why with them. Where the trail ends. Not one of the 25 people aboard the Joyita, crew or passenger, doctor, government official, or either of the two children, was ever found, alive or dead. Verify this remains accurate before final recording. Trail ends beat, the New Zealand inquiry closed without a definitive finding on what caused the crew to abandon a vessel that, by every physical measure, should have kept them alive until rescue arrived. What does remain is the ship herself. Salvaged and repaired, the Joyita was put back into service under new owners, and continued sailing the same Pacific waters for years afterward, carrying no answers with her. The Joyita was salvaged, repaired, and sailed again for years afterward. The ship that couldn't sink kept its promise. It just kept it alone. End.